So, as part of the hearing, kind of last but not least, they discussed at length hypothetical or possible regulatory actions that might be taken. And this conversation actually raised some tough questions. So, Senate Judiciary Chair Senator Dick Durbin suggested the need for a new agency to oversee the development of AI and possibly an international agency. So, one example cited of a model is the International Atomic Energy Agency, which promotes and enforces the safe use of nuclear technology. Gary Marcus said there should be a safety review to vet AI systems before they are widely deployed. So, similar to something like what is used with the FDA before you're allowed to release a drug. He also advocated for what he called a quote, nimble monitoring agency. And interestingly, kind of on the subject of government agencies, Senator Blumenthal, who has, chaired or been involved in the creation of some of these agencies, cautioned that any agency has to have adequate resources, both money and the appropriate experts on staff, because he cautioned an agency without those is something that AI companies would, quote, run circles around us. And as part of this overall regulatory discussion, there was a fair share of controversy as well, because at one point, Sam Altman suggested having some type of licensing requirements for the development of AI technology. So some of the observers I saw at other AI companies were immediately crying foul over this because they saw it as a transparent move to engage in what is called in the industry, quote, regulatory capture. So that's when, well-funded, powerful incumbents end up influencing laws and regulations in their favor and also to stifle competitors. So it's kind of a tactic, not an altruistic thing. Some other people commenting on the hearing remarked on how cordial the hearing seemed. It was a very far cry from when our social media executives went in front of Congress. And they said that some senators appear ready and willing to kind of allow OpenAI to play a pretty big role in its own regulation. And indeed, Altman met with about 60 lawmakers at a private dinner in the days before the hearing. And he has been engaged for several months on what some have called a charm offensive with lawmakers. So, Paul, as you're looking at the proposed regulatory solutions, licensing, possible agencies, do any of these seem reasonable or feasible to you?
I could hear any of these being potentially viable. I mean, honestly, depending on who's saying it, it's like, oh, okay, that makes a lot of sense. And then you look at the other side and it's like, okay, yeah, I understand why that would be problematic. One of the things I thought was interesting, I forget which senator asked the question of Altman, but it was like something like, would you come and lead it? And he said, I love what I'm doing, sir. Like, because I think that's one of the challenges here is all this sounds great. Create an agency. I've seen the arguments that, yeah, it needs its own agency. And then I've seen other arguments to say, what do we need more agencies for? Let's just administer the laws we already have and apply them to AI. And it's like, oh, okay, yeah, that actually both makes sense. So I would say for me, it's really too early for me to form a true point of view on this and say, these are the three things I think need to happen. I don't know. Like, I'm just like all of you, like I'm kind of like processing this information, listen to both sides. You understand everyone has their own agenda, whether it's political or business wise. And so you always have to take with a grain of salt who's saying what and why are they saying it, and then try and kind of filter through. I would say that Aaron Levy, who we've mentioned before, the CEO of Box, he tweeted out, and I thought it kind of captured it pretty well. He said AI regulation will be one of the most complicated and critical areas of policy in the 21st century. Move too fast or regulate the wrong aspect, and you squelch innovation or anoint winners too early. Move too slow, and inevitable risks emerge. Wild times ahead. That's kind of how I feel. Like, they've got to do something. I don't know what the answer is. I don't think they're going to find like a magic bullet to just put all this in place in like the next 2 years and we're good to go. But I don't know. There's a lot of interesting ideas that I think are worth exploring further. And I just like that they're listening right now. And I think they need to keep listening to the independent scientists, the tech leaders, the ethicists. Like, they really need a lot of diverse perspective. And then we need people leading these government committees who we are confident actually understand the technology. And nothing else, it seems like they're investing a lot of time to try and figure it out.
Yeah, it's pretty easy to dunk on Congress, and often they deserve it. But it does, there were a couple comments during a hearing, it sounded like, that they realized they kind of got burned on social media and got caught flat footed with that type of technology regulation and understanding. So it is heartening, at least to your point, to see intelligent conversations happening about this. I want to talk really quick about Altman's licensing comments specifically. Those are getting a ton of attention in kind of the world of AI. Do you see that as a good faith effort to find a regulatory solution, or is that just kind of as self-interested as some of the critics say it is?
This is one where I actually believe Altman. Like I feel like he's genuine here. And again, like you have to take a lot of things in context to evaluate these. So this is a guy who came from leading Y Combinator. He is a startup champion through and through. Like he believes in the importance of startups as an economic driver. He believes in entrepreneurship and building companies. Like that's his background. Then he's built this company as a cap profit company underneath a nonprofit. So there's like he's paying himself enough to like cover his health insurance. Like
Mm,
I don't understand that one, but like for whatever reason, like he's barely even taking a paycheck. He doesn't own any equity in OpenAI. Like there's a lot of things that say this guy is truly trying to solve for this. Like he has more money than he needs in his life and probably for generations. Like he's already good.
mm,
So if he makes another billion or whatever, like it's not going to change his life. And so I want to believe what he's saying at face value. And I think it was misconstrued what he was trying to get across with this licensing idea. But he had a follow-up tweet that I thought he kind of like summarized pretty well. He said, AGI safety is really important and frontier models should be regulated. Regulatory capture is bad, and we shouldn't mess with models before the threshold. Open source models and small startups are obviously important.
mm,
So he's basically saying like we shouldn't crown the winners now. It shouldn't be Google and Microsoft and OpenAI and a few others and Meta, whatever. And like that's it. And nobody else can get in. But I do really think that he is not worried about today. He believes they are going to get to AGI in the near future. And he is trying to prepare society and the government for that, what he believes to be an inevitable outcome.
mm,
And so it's really hard for all of us to judge what they're trying to do and the ideas they have because he's seeing years ahead of what we know to be true. And he's trying to help put things in place to protect us when that occurs.
mm.
And so, with all of that context, I want to believe what he is doing, what OpenAI is doing is truly an altruistic thing. And I just hope the government gets it right.
Mm. So, on that note, I know you've been a bit skeptical of how quickly we'll actually get useful AI regulations. Given everything we've discussed and some of the other things going on from a regulatory perspective, do you still feel that way?
Well, I don't know that this one is going to do anything, but this is probably a good point to talk about those other hearings that were going on last week. So we'll just kind of maybe I'll take a moment and walk through a couple of key points from what else was happening last week, because these are the things that kind of give me hope that maybe there's way more going on than we're aware of.
Mm,
And maybe things are moving along a little quicker. So the same day as the hearing we've been talking about, there was actually another hearing upstairs in the Senate building. So this comes from a Politico article. And honestly, like the other three ones we're going to talk about, there wasn't much out there about them. Like we had to do some digging to try and figure out what was even talked about in these. So there's very limited resources. We'll link to the few articles that we mention here. Um, but this was the Senate Committee on Homeland Security and Government Affairs, and the hearing brought together current and former government officials, academia, and civil society to discuss a bunch of ideas on how the federal government should channel its immense budget toward incorporating AI systems while guarding against unfairness and violations of privacy. So it gets into some specific things like supercharging the federal AI workforce, shining a light on federal use of automated systems, investing in public facing computing infrastructure, and steering the government's billions of dollars in tech towards responsible AI tools. So this is interesting. This is one that jumps out to me. even if there aren't rules and regulations, the government is a major buyer of technology. They can very simply put in place requirements for you to be a vendor to the government. Now, even without laws, it's like, well, we have to apply or abide by the responsible AI guidelines of the government for X, Y, and Z. So that's where the government can actually have a much quicker effect. So it says Lynn Parker, former assistant director for AI at the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, suggested each agency should tap one official to be a chief AI officer. I like that idea. Business should follow that idea. She also talked about multiple panelists and lawmakers called for boosting AI literacy as a crucial first step toward new AI rules. Agree 100%. We've talked about it on the show. And it says Peters partnered with Senator Mike Braun, Republican from Indiana, on a bill that would create an AI training program for federal supervisors and management officials. Love it. Also, significant emphasis on standing up a national AI research resource. The Biden administration envisions this as a sandbox for AI researchers that can't afford the massive computing infrastructure used by OpenAI. That's a great idea. Like, it's going to be really, we've talked about this, really hard to get access to the compute power if you're a small player. So let's democratize access to these capabilities. It says through an initial $2.6 billion investment over 6 years, it would give AI researchers access to powerful computing capabilities in exchange for their agreement to follow a set of government-approved norms. But Congress still needs to sign off on this plan. So again, this is like a clearer path to near-term impact where the government uses its strength and dollars to basically force the industry to follow along with these norms and policies in exchange for either access to compute power as a startup or access to being a vendor to the government. So, that seemed really positive. The other one was on Wednesday. We had the House Judiciary Subcommittee on Courts, Intellectual Property, and the Internet. And this one was dealing with copyright issues. So it said that, and again, this was actually another Politico article. Politico is like the place to go to like learn what's actually happening. So they aired out some key emerging concerns during the meeting. One of the biggest issues is how to compensate or credit artists, whether musicians, writers, or photographers, when their work is used to train a model or is the inspiration for an AI's creation, which we've talked about previously on the podcast, is really challenging right now, given the current technology. One of the key issues that they pressed on is who should be compensated for all the material and how it would work. Subcommittee Chair Daryl Issa, whose background is in electronics industry, proposed one mechanism, a database to track the sources of training data. Quote, credit would seem to be one that Congress could mandate that the database input be searchable, so you know that your work or your name or something was in the database. So then they said a key question emerging now is, when does the use of an artist's work to train AI constitute fair use under the law? And when is it a copyright violation under current law? So this one certainly starts directly impacting businesses, marketing, artists, things like that. So again, most people have no idea that these conversations are even happening. It's a positive development that they seem to be at least asking the right questions. And then the last and most intriguing to me that I couldn't find anything about, other than a couple of articles, but even then it was hard to like get too much information, was on Friday, there was the President's Council of Advisors on Science and Technology held a meeting that apparently included Dr. Fei-Fei Li and Demis Hassabis from Google DeepMind, among others. And they were looking at opportunities and risks to provide input on how best to ensure that these technologies are developed and deployed as equitable, responsibly, and safe as possible. So they were looking at generative AI models can be used for malicious purposes, such as creating disinformation, driving misinformation in campaigns, and impersonating individuals. So they're looking at how to enable it, what the impact of it is on society. But interestingly enough, in the kind of the summary I found, they actually outline like, here's everything the government is doing. So I'll just take a moment and kind of read this paragraph, because again, it gives me hope that there is way more going on than we know about or we're hearing in the media every day. So it says, U.S. government agencies are actively helping to achieve a balance. For instance, the White House blueprint for an AI Bill of Rights lays out core aspirational principles to guide the responsible design and deployment of AI technologies. That came out last year. We had an episode about that one. The National Institute of Standards and Technology released the AI Risk Management Framework to help organizations and individuals characterize and manage the potential risks of AI tech. Congress created the National Security Commission on AI, which studied opportunities and risks ahead and the importance of guiding the development of AI in accordance with American values around democracy and civil liberties. The National Artificial Intelligence Initiative was launched to ensure U.S. leadership in the responsible development and deployment of trustworthy AI and support coordination of U.S. research, development, and demonstration of AI technologies across the federal government. And in January of this year, the congressionally mandated National AI Research Resource, which we mentioned earlier, task force released an implementation plan for providing computational data, testbeds, and software resources to AI researchers affiliated with U.S. organizations. So this presidential council is kind of built to build upon what was already done. And then I'll wrap up here. I thought it was really interesting. They actually asked the public for ideas on generative AI. And then they had 5 questions. I thought these were really interesting, the things they were asking just random people to submit ideas for. So the first is in an era in which convincing images, again, step back. The reason I think this is interesting is because it gives a lens into the things that they're thinking about, that they're obviously building plans for themselves. So this is kind of what the government is focused on here. In an era in which convincing images, audio, and text can be generated with ease on a massive scale, how can we ensure reliable access to verifiable, trustworthy information? How can we be certain that a particular piece of media is genuinely from the claim source? That is critical. We've talked about the importance of that one, but that they don't have an answer. Number 2 was how can we best deal with the use of AI by malicious actors to manipulate the beliefs and understanding of citizens? 100%. That's the election interference issue. Number 3 is what technologies, policies, and infrastructure can be developed to detect and counter AI-generated disinformation. We've talked about that a bunch of times. It seems really hard right now. Google, a couple weeks ago, said they're working on it. And it seems like they're confident they may have ways to do it, to be determined. The 4th, how can we ensure that the engagement of the public with elected representatives, a cornerstone of democracy, is not drowned out by AI-generated noise? And then the last was, how can we help everyone, including our scientific, political, industrial, and educational leaders, develop the skills needed to identify AI-generated misinformation, impersonation, and manipulation? So I think in totality, if nothing else, I hope this episode helps people realize there is a lot actually going on in Washington. This is being thought about deeply. They're doing what they should be doing, which is racing to understand the technology and the impacts it's having. And I want to be optimistic here and say that these collective efforts will move the needle on safety for U.S. citizens and hopefully globally. While I don't expect laws and regulations to emerge immediately, as we discussed, there's a lot of levers the government can pull that don't require the passing of new laws. In addition to the previous episodes where we talked about all the FTC and how they're just applying existing laws. So I think if nothing else, this is a very high priority topic for the U.S. government. And they appear to be doing a lot of work behind the scenes to figure out what to do next.
That's awesome. Thank you for that roundup. I mean, I think it's extremely important that our audience not only realize how much is going on, but just become aware of the need to stay on top of these kinds of issues because they will affect all of us, like we just described.